am delighted to be joined by two true experts. These guys are both pretty high up on the call lists of major corporations and governments around the world who are looking at their innovation strategies. In no particular order, Pranay Ahlawat is a partner at Boston Consulting Group, based out in Silicon Valley, I believe, where the sun is shining. Pranay leads BCG's innovation practice, as well as having a sideline in advising their clients on artificial intelligence. So he also holds some cloud-related patents, including, and I did actually look this up before, let me see if I get this right, Pranay. It's a way of virtualizing your desktop so that it no longer exists. It's just in the cloud. Is that right? Yeah, okay. He's fully ready for the metaverse, I think. And George Humphrey is the vice president of the TSIA, which is the Technology and Services Industry Association. TSIA, they are the tech people's tech people. And he leads their research into service and delivery by tech companies themselves. So it's the people who are building cloud that come to George for advice. Now, I'm not sure, George, if he has actually got any patents, but he definitely has a fantastic guitar collection back there. So hopefully we might be able to persuade you to play us out a bit later. Anyway, welcome, both of you. Before we start the conversation, however, we're going to have the first of our three polls today. On the screen, you're going to see a simple question, and we would just like you to give us your gut reaction. Where do you think the biggest benefits of cloud technologies are going to come from? Well, the questions will be out for a couple of minutes, so don't rush. But whilst you're doing it, we're going to start the conversation. So, George, I'm going to come to you first. We have heard a lot about cloud. Seems to be pretty much everywhere, and all that anyone can talk about these days. But what exactly is it? And is it really as big a deal as the tech industry wants us all to think that it is? Oh, you're on mute. I've been waiting all day to say that to someone.
I swore I wasn't going to do the mute thing.
I win.
So cloud, yeah. So cloud is everywhere. It's all around us. It's incredibly disruptive to the way companies have created technology solutions and sold those to their customers. But from the purest and simplest form of the definition, cloud computing or cloud technology is really moving technology from the customer's premises, where they procure through CapEx, they buy the stuff, and then they self-operate, and they hope to get the value that was promised them out of that technology. Cloud solutions move at a minimum the intelligence of the infrastructure and applications to a data center. That could be an Amazon data center, it could be a Microsoft or Google data center, it could be a co-location facility, a private data center. But it's really moving a lot of the intelligence of the infrastructure and applications away from the customer premises and to a co-location facility, and then that technology is subscribed to by the customer. So the customer can alleviate some of the operational complexity and also alleviate some of the financial pain of buying that stuff outright and hoping to get value out of that technology themselves.
Okay, but that sounds great, but it doesn't sound like it's world-changing. It's just running your software on somebody else's computer. There must be more to it than that, surely.
Yeah, sure. So the key is once you move all of that technology out of the customer location and into a centralized location, the first benefit you get, especially if you move to a multi-tenancy model, is rapid scale. And then also the efficiency of developing the software once, and then all customers getting access to the benefits of that, not having those disjointed releases of the technology all over the place. The other benefit is the ability to perform data and analytics on the application that is in the cloud, really understanding usage patterns, user profiles, et cetera, and being able to provide a solution that is more compelling to the customer than if they could buy that stuff and try to operate it and get those benefits themselves.
Okay. I think I understand. Pranay, you advise a lot of these companies, and I guess they come to you and they say we're thinking about moving to the cloud. If I was a CEO and I'd asked you why should I do it, what can I hope to get out of doing it, what would be on your list?
I think it's just to add to George's points here. It usually sort of boils down to three things. The first is faster innovation and agility. I mean, I think if you take a look at the higher level platforms, the databases, et cetera, I think it gets enterprises away from actually managing the nuts and bolts of the data center and infrastructure to actually innovating, and that speeds up both innovation as well as time to market. The second is a lot of them are actually, a lot of them realize TCO, or total cost of ownership, benefits as well. There have been multiple studies done, but on average, anything from 10 to 30% cost savings, because, you do, and it's mostly coming from labor, but also coming from actually not buying hardware, spending capex on hardware, and having servers sitting in your warehouse, et cetera. And then I think the third benefit is exactly what George said. It's that of scale. The fact is that today, tiny operations teams can actually create web scale, consumer grade web scale applications by basically making a few clicks on the AWS console, and that's extremely powerful. What's even more interesting, I think, for gaming companies and consumer companies in particular, is what we call sort of the second order benefits of cloud. And I think the first one is actually the ability to deliver next generation customer experiences. So if you take a look at content delivery networks, if you take a look at services like AWS Wavelength and hyperlocal clouds to deliver near real-time experiences and satisfy those type of use cases, and also build AR, VR use cases of the future, using services like AWS Sumerian. I mean, cloud's making all of that possible. And then, the second order benefits, I couldn't agree more with George. It's about analytics. I think increasingly, and we've seen this enterprise after enterprise, cloud has become the preferred destination for both data as well as analytics. I mean, and this is because again, it's 30% cheaper. It's extremely efficient to actually run training and inference on cloud at scale because it's a spiky workload. And then also that is where the data gravity is for a lot of the enterprises. If you take a big step back, I think unlocking data is going to be a critical vector to create next generation customer experiences, and cloud will be the technology on which it'll be done.
Okay. We've got a better toolbox, I guess, which is great. George, tell us, what are people doing with that toolbox? Give us some examples.
Great. I'll give you an example that's one of my favorite ones. We've been on this journey with Philips Healthcare for several years as they've really tried to rethink the value they can bring to their customers with their technology. And of course, they make all kinds of medical technologies. One of the technologies they make is healthcare monitoring systems. And those devices and those systems can be anywhere from consumer devices that you may have at home, like you're not feeling well, and you take your temperature and there's data there. And you're not feeling well and you have a temperature, so you go to the doctor and the doctor performs some more diagnosis on you. They'll take your temperature, that's a monitor. They'll take your blood pressure, that's another monitor. And again, they'll assess your health and there's data there. And then if they're concerned, they may send you right to the emergency room, where again, they'll connect you to additional medical devices, gather data and insights from you, and so on and so forth. And then as you get better, maybe you'll go to an outpatient clinic, rinse and repeat. Eventually you'll go home and be connected to some devices to continue to monitor you. And there's the production of all of this data. And historically it's been point-based. Well, what Philips has done is they've created a model where healthcare institutions can subscribe to all of those healthcare technologies and get access to Philips healthcare monitoring technologies in the cloud that gather all of that data, that analyze the data, that look for the correlations along the way so that they could make more prescriptive, detailed insights to the customer or to the patient to help get them better faster. And so really that's the goal. They have an outcome objective of shrinking the amount of time it takes from when the patient goes to see their primary care physician all the way to when they're at home recovering, to shrink that time. So it's really achieving health benefits for the customer that they frankly couldn't have done before if they didn't have the cloud aspect and the subscription aspect to that solution.
That's amazing. So you're saying that what the cloud infrastructure has enabled Philips to do is to turn itself from effectively a device company into a monitoring as a service business. So they've almost entirely reoriented what they do for a living. And yet it's a very technology heavy, but without them having to build all of that heavy duty infrastructure themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a lot of companies think that cloud just means you shift to subscription. So I used to buy this stuff, now I subscribe to this stuff. It's really the service aspect and technology as a service. And those services will help achieve additional benefits and goals that they couldn't achieve before when they were just buying technology.
Okay, so it is literally life-saving as well as more efficient.
That's right.
Yeah, impressive. Pranay, you mentioned scalability as an aspect, and actually I've heard this phrase hyperscale, which sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because there's obviously a real relevance there for lotteries, particularly with the multi-state games that have enormous volumes for very short periods of time.
You can blame consultants for adding more words to the technology vernacular, Charles. But
we pay consultants to do that.
But by the way, I mean, it's a less serious example than actually saving lives. But Netflix is a fantastic case study. It's a company that's done extraordinarily well. You mentioned the vector of, hey, listen, using technology to completely shift the business model on its head. I mean, what's a better example than Netflix that moved from like DVD to streaming services and completely changed the way how consumers basically consume media. And what's interesting is, I mean, if you take a look at Netflix today, it's more than 220 million users. 60 million of them are actually in the US. So the bulk of them are actually outside the US. So this is a truly sort of global behemoth. And an average user, this is a stat that actually surprised me, but an average user does about 3.2 hours of streaming a day. That equates to roughly about 300 gigabytes a month. For one user. You add that up, across 220 million users, it starts to actually tell you the scale at which Netflix is actually delivering its service, not to mention thousands of hours of like streaming content that they have to manage across the world. And one of the decisions that Netflix actually made very early was to actually hitch their anchor on cloud. They're completely architected on AWS. And I would argue, actually, it was a brilliant strategy because it actually allowed them to scale. It allowed them to actually focus. It actually allowed them to focus on building great customer experiences, on mobile phones, on smart TVs, and the like. It got them away from actually having to spend an enormous amount of money on building this infrastructure from scratch. So it's a strategy that I think was central to why Netflix was able to actually move and actually grow to I think $7.5 billion or however much it is making in revenue today. What's also interesting is actually one of the points that George touched on before. It also allows Netflix to actually become extremely data-driven in the way they're innovating. So Netflix, again, and this is true for a lot of good consumer tech companies, are extremely data-driven in how they're actually tracking customers. They launch small pilots for products to basically see if a concept is working before actually scaling it across the world. And the DevOps capabilities and the flexibility of cloud is actually a major vector that's driving that capability. So again, again, the lessons of scalability extend beyond just pure infrastructure. I think it actually helps you scale by actually giving you more capabilities as a product team.
I mean, I'm fascinated by this because I'm a Netflix customer, myself, but also other cloud-based services from Spotify to now Microsoft. And the thing that strikes me about it is how frequently they change and update their products. I mean, sometimes daily. If you log into Spotify, it looks completely different from one day to the next. Is that innovation cycle is that what's driving this move to the cloud? Is the need to do that, or is it a result of being in the cloud? And what which way round is it?
I think it's a self-reinforcing cycle, Charles. So I think companies move to the cloud. Some of them actually seek good business results, faster innovation. But then, companies that are already doing it. So it's a very self-reinforcing cycle. And truth be told, I think if you take a big step back, I think, coming out of reInvent last week, I think one of the words we heard was like actually commoditization of software and commoditization of technology. But that's exactly what cloud has done. It's actually made some of these capabilities more accessible to a wider array of companies. And I think the speed of innovation and the macro impact that's actually having on both newer customer experiences as well as the competition it's driving, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how much cloud has actually changed the technology landscape at just the macro level.
So, Charles, if I could just piggyback on that. So we wrote a book a few years ago, and it's called B4B. Instead of business to business, which is the way the technology worked for the past 7 decades, companies made stuff and they sold it to other companies and said, good luck, call us when it breaks. But now the world, because of the cloud, has shifted to a business for business, and really talking about what Pranay just talked about with Netflix. So, it started with them with simple signal liquidity. The data that was coming out of the experience of the consumer was able to be analyzed. What did they watch? How long did they watch it for? And what did they watch next? And that allowed them to really understand their customer better, to provide better solutions and better experiences. And so it is cyclical. And an example may be with lottery. You have customers that show up to a lotto machine and they buy a ticket. What kind of game did they play? How frequently they play? What did they play next? What do the demographics of those players look like from city to city? And so now you can gather all of that signal liquidity and use it to design better experiences for the customers. Do they prefer to look at their results on an app? Do they prefer to go into the store? And so know the user so you can provide better business services to those users.
Okay. I've got a question from the audience here. Bearing in mind that lotteries are generally at the beginning of this process, of this journey to the cloud nirvana that you're describing, we've got a few minutes left. What does a process look like for migrating from an on-premise to a cloud environment? Is it a big bang, or are there steps along the way? George, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. There's a framework that we use all the time. It's called Premises to Cloud that talks about this exact journey. And if you think about historically, again, you sold technology. These were integrated systems, hardware and software combined, to a customer in a CapEx model. And the customer is self-operated. Well, as the complexity avalanche increases with technology, software centricity, network dependency, the customer has some challenges with that complexity, and they're not able to get the intended value out of the technology. So they may elicit some help, some more consultative services, design services, some premium support services. And so you're transferring more of the responsibility back to the provider, monetizing that through a service return. And then as that technology continues to decompose and it becomes more software centric, you can extract that software, put it into a data center, yet still have some of the infrastructure on premises. And so you're sort of doing a blended model. And in that model, the provider is operating even more. So the operator model of requirements and responsibilities continues to increase. Then you can start to build private clouds where you can take those solutions, dedicate them to a customer, put them in a co-location facility. So now the customer can subscribe and the provider can operate that technology. Last but not least in the evolution is to move towards this multi-tenancy. So as much of the capability is moved into the cloud so you can get the benefits of the scale and the data science and analytics, yet there may still also be some elements, some edge elements to the customer solution that still may reside on premises, but it's managed and operated as a holistic solution.
Pranay, what's a hybrid cloud? What's that look like?
Yeah, this is actually a perfect segue because I was going to add to what George said. I think definitionally hybrid cloud is essentially running your IT infrastructure on both public cloud as well as on-premise. And the reality is 80% of the customers are multi-cloud, vast majority, 66% or so, and we have published numbers which I'm happy to share, are actually operating in a hybrid world. And again, 40 to 50% of the workloads are not going anywhere. They're still remaining on premise. If you think about legacy workloads like mainframe, mission critical, high-risk workloads like ERP, I think what we have seen is enterprises are generally very are still apprehensive about moving those workloads to the cloud. So, hybrid is, there's a definitional aspect to it, but I think the bigger lesson here is there's it's the operational reality of the vast majority of enterprises today. And, it's a challenge. I think security is a challenge. Operating these is a challenge. And I will add one more thought to the question, because you mentioned Big Bang. I think it's rarely Big Bang, and rarely is technology the problem. I think the bigger challenge that enterprises face today is cultural and it's organizational. So, when we engage with clients, the bulk of the effort here is actually setting our enterprise clients up with the right operating model, having a lot of thought partnership on actually putting in the right talent strategy to basically build these teams, and also building capabilities like FinOps and CloudOps, which is net new muscle for these enterprises. That's where the bulk of the transformation pain is.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we're coming up to the end of the session. Let's have a quick look at the results of our little poll, see what everybody in the audience thinks.
Fascinating.
Wow. Okay, the winner is access to big data. Does that surprise you guys?
Not at all. I would completely agree with that. I would just add to that, though, you can't get the big data without monitoring, and so those should go hand in hand. I wrote a paper on this last year called "The Rise of AI Ops," and it talks about all of these critical capabilities. But this does not surprise me. This encourages me because Pranay is right. It's the hearts and minds, the culture that are the real challenge and obstacles to innovation, and this is really encouraging.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you both very much. Now, don't forget, everybody, that you can find out more about these two splendid people in the digital library, which also includes their LinkedIn profiles, so you can stalk them on LinkedIn. I've also made some notes to share with you, and if we could just have a quick look at those, thanks. So it does seem that this isn't just hype. There is a generational shift in the way that technology, or software rather, is consumed. It's almost as if we're all becoming technology companies without necessarily having to be software businesses at the same time. And it also looks, if you look at the scale from Philips Healthcare all the way through to Netflix, that there's almost nothing that can't eventually be put in the cloud. But there's obviously the caveat that Pranay mentioned towards the end, that there are some things which are mission critical and so sensitive that even large corporations are not quite yet ready to do it. But there are steps along the way, George's paths. And I love that idea of B4B. I think that's brilliant. I can see that circulating pretty quickly around IGT. And it definitely opens opportunities for all kinds of new types of services and changes the definition of what is possible. So anyway, both of you, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.